I was 19 when this happened, a first-year college student who thought coming home for a long weekend would help me relax. I remember that night clearly, because nothing about it felt unusual at first. I wasn't dealing with stress, I wasn't having nightmares, and I wasn't expecting anything except a quiet evening in the house I grew up in. I had driven in from campus earlier that day, pulling into the same driveway I'd seen since I was a kid. My parents were out of town visiting my aunt in Indiana, so I was alone, but that never bothered me. I knew that house better than any place on earth. The neighborhood was safe, the kind of place where people leave porch lights on and wave at anyone walking their dog after sunset. Everything about that evening felt exactly how it always felt, normal, predictable, quiet. I brought my bags inside, tossed my laundry on the floor of my old bedroom, and settled into the routine I always fell into when I visited. I ordered takeout from the same pizza place I went to in high school. I watched some random show on Netflix without really paying attention. Around 11 p.m., I went through the house, checking that all the doors were locked, not because I was scared, but because my mom always reminded me to. It was a habit more than anything else. Nothing felt off. Nothing felt wrong. The lights hummed the same way they always did. The old wooden floor in the hallway made the same light-popping sounds whenever the temperature changed. Even the house's usual nighttime quiet felt comforting. I'd fallen asleep in that place hundreds of times. I trusted it. Around midnight, I went to my room and got into bed. I didn't scroll on my phone or watch videos. I was actually tired. I remember lying there, staring at the ceiling fan as it turned slowly, thinking how weird it felt to be back in my old room again, like the past and present were overlapping for a second. I eventually drifted off without any trouble. I don't know why my eyes suddenly opened in the middle of the night. There was no nightmare, no sound, no reason that I could understand. I just woke up. The room was dark except for a strip of yellowish streetlight coming in through the blinds. It took me a second to register what time it was. When I finally grabbed my phone, the screen lit up with 3:02 a.m. At first, I didn't think much of it. Sometimes people just wake up. But as I lay there, still half asleep, something slowly pulled me out of that groggy state. My bedroom door. I always close it all the way. I've done that since I was a kid. But when I looked at it through the dim light, I saw it was open. Only a few inches, but open enough for a thin line of darkness to spill into my room. And the thing that bothered me wasn't that I had closed it. It was the fact that I could swear it hadn't been open when I fell asleep. The house I stayed in that weekend wasn't anything special. It was a small, single-story place on the edge of a quiet neighborhood in Ohio, the same home my parents had lived in for almost 20 years. Nothing about it looked unusual or creepy. The floors were old wood, the walls were a faded off-white, and the hallway was narrow enough that you could touch both sides if you stretched out your arms. It was familiar in every possible way, the kind of place you stop noticing because you've seen every inch of it your whole life. Outside, the weather had dropped into that chilly early fall temperature where the air feels colder than you expect once the sun goes down. The sky was dark and clear, the kind of night where sound travels farther than normal. I remember hearing a dog bark a few streets over when I brought my backpack inside. Cars barely passed after 9 p.m. in that neighborhood, and the ones that did sounded distant, like they belonged to another town entirely. Inside, the house had its usual nighttime atmosphere, quiet, still, and a little too dim because the hallway bulb flickered if you set it to the brightest level. I left most of the lights off to save electricity, since I was alone. A small lamp in the living room, the kitchen light over the sink, and the soft glow from my bedroom lamp were enough to move around comfortably. It felt safe. I'd walked through that house half asleep hundreds of times without any fear. The reason I was even home that weekend was simple. I needed a break. College had been overwhelming those first few weeks. The classes were fine, but the non-stop noise in the dorms was getting to me. My roommate had friends over at all hours, and I couldn't study, sleep, or even think sometimes. So when my parents told me they'd be out of town and said I was welcome to use the house if I wanted some quiet, I took the offer immediately. A calm weekend alone sounded like exactly what I needed. There weren't really any other characters involved that night. My parents were already gone by the time I arrived. My neighbors were people I knew by face but not by name, older couples who kept to themselves. My closest friend lived 30 minutes away and had plans that weekend. I didn't expect visitors, and nobody knew I was home except a few people from college. I wasn't avoiding anything. I wasn't running from any big problem. I came home because I wanted silence, a comfortable bed, and one weekend where I didn't have to listen to slamming doors or drunk arguments in the hallway. The house gave me exactly what I wanted: peace. At least, that's what I thought. There was nothing strange in the air, nothing that felt wrong. Everything about that night looked exactly like every other night I'd spent there. And that's why the small detail I noticed at 3:02 a.m. didn't make sense. Because nothing in that house ever changed, unless someone changed it. When I woke up at 3:02 a.m., I didn't react right away. I was still half asleep, trying to figure out why I had woken up in the first place. For a few seconds, I just lay there staring at the faint glow coming through my window blinds. The room was quiet. Too quiet, actually. Even the old fan on my dresser had stopped spinning because I'd turned it off the night before. Then my eyes drifted to the doorway. The door wasn't fully open, but it wasn't closed either. It sat there in that strange, uncomfortable position, cracked open just enough that I could see the hallway darkness on the other side. I knew I had shut it before going to sleep. I do that every night, especially when I'm home alone. It's not a fear thing. It's just a habit I never broke. At first, I tried to explain it away. Maybe the latch didn't catch. Maybe I didn't push it all the way. Maybe the house settled and shifted it open a little. Old houses do stuff like that. I told myself all of that in maybe 3 seconds, trying to push away the irritation creeping at my back. But something felt off. Something small, but real. I didn't hear the door move earlier. I didn't hear anything at all. Usually if someone opens a door, even slightly, the hinges make at least a tiny sound. But I woke up to nothing. Just silence. I sat up slowly, listening. The house had a certain nighttime rhythm that I grew up with. The fridge hums every so often. The heater clicks. A pipe in the bathroom sometimes taps faintly. But none of those sounds were happening. There was just this still, heavy quiet that didn't feel like it belonged there. I swallowed and kept listening. My heartbeat felt louder than any noise in the house. I tried to breathe slowly, so I didn't imagine things. After about a minute, I thought I heard something very soft, like the slightest shift of weight on the hallway floorboards. Not a step. More like pressure moving. A subtle, almost casual adjustment. I froze. I knew that sound. I grew up in that house. I knew how the floor responded when someone walked down the hall. The wood dipped the tiniest bit in the middle. You could feel it in your feet. But you could also hear it if the house was silent. I didn't move. I just stared at that thin line of darkness between the door and the frame. Then something even smaller happened. A slow inhale. Not loud. Not sharp. Just a quiet, steady breath that didn't belong to me. I felt the air in my chest lock. I didn't know where it came from. It could have been inside the hallway, or maybe just the air vent behind the bathroom. I told myself it could be anything. But it didn't sound like air from a vent. It sounded human. Controlled. My fingers tightened around the blanket without me realizing it. My eyes stayed locked on the door. My brain kept telling me I was overthinking it, that it was late, that I was tired, that silence can make anything feel bigger than it is. But even with all that reasoning, one thing wouldn't go away. For the first time in years, my childhood home didn't feel familiar. It felt occupied. I kept staring at the door, waiting for some normal explanation to come to me. It never did. The longer I looked at that thin gap, the more I felt like something on the other side was aware of me. It wasn't noise anymore. It was the silence itself that felt wrong, like the hallway was expecting me to do something. I finally reached over and grabbed my phone from the nightstand. The screen lit up my whole room, and for a second I felt stupid for being scared. It was just a crack in the door. I told myself I'd get up, close it, and go back to sleep. But before I even sat up fully, I heard another sound. A floorboard. A real one this time. Not a creak from the house settling. Not a natural pop. It was the sound of weight shifting from one foot to another. controlled, slow. My mouth went dry. I didn't move. I listened as carefully as I could, trying to decide if what I heard was actually a person or just my nerves. But then it happened again. Another tiny compression of wood, this time slightly closer to my room. That was enough to tell me I wasn't imagining it. Someone was in the hallway. I lowered my phone screen so the light wouldn't shine toward the door. My breathing got shallow, without me meaning to. My brain kept trying to come up with a safe explanation, a neighbor checking in, a relative with a spare key, something harmless. But nobody had a key. Nobody knew I was home except my parents, and they were in another state. I waited. I counted the seconds in my head. 5, 10, 20. Nothing. No movement. No sound. And that stillness somehow felt worse than the noises did, like whoever was out there had realized I was awake and was trying not to reveal anything else. Then the shadow appeared. It came from the bottom of the door first, a soft, shifting darkness that interrupted the strip of yellow light from the street. It wasn't big. It wasn't dramatic. But it was unmistakably someone's foot standing just outside my room. I instinctively pulled my legs closer to my chest. I didn't dare make noise. A cold wave went through my body as I realized the person wasn't walking or pacing. They were standing still, watching, listening. I told myself to get up and run, but fear locked me in place. The idea of putting my feet on the floor and taking a step toward that door felt impossible. I didn't know if they were looking under the gap or pressed against the door, but I could feel the presence like heat. Then the doorknob shifted. Not fully. Not loudly. Just the soft, deliberate click of someone testing how quietly they could turn it. That was the moment I understood that I wasn't dealing with a misunderstanding or a mistaken identity. Someone had gotten into the house. Someone who knew I was awake. Someone who wasn't leaving. And the worst part was the simple, terrifying truth. They were already inside, between me and any exit. And the only barrier left was a door I knew wouldn't hold. The doorknob moved again, this time slower, like the person on the other side was trying to learn how much pressure it would take before it made a sound. That tiny click felt sharper than anything I'd ever heard. I froze completely. I didn't blink. I didn't breathe. All I could do was watch the shadow beneath the door shift slightly as the weight outside adjusted. I knew I couldn't stay in bed. If the door opened, I'd be trapped in the corner of the room with nowhere to go. My window was behind me, but it stuck sometimes, and I didn't know if I'd have enough time to open it before whoever was out there made it inside. The doorknob stopped moving, and for a moment I thought maybe the person had stepped back. But then the door moved just a hair, barely half an inch. Not pushed. Tested. Like he wanted to see if I'd make a sound. That was enough. I grabbed the only thing I had within reach, a metal water bottle on my nightstand, and slid off my bed as quietly as possible. I kept low, trying to stay out of the line of sight of the door crack. My hands were shaking so badly the bottle almost slipped from my grip. When I reached the window, I pushed the blinds aside and unlocked the latch. The cold air immediately hit my face. I quietly lifted the window. It stuck halfway up, making a dry scraping noise that felt impossibly loud in the silence. My heart jumped into my throat. From the hallway, the floorboard creaked again. This time, it was closer, right in front of my door. I forced the window higher, inch by inch, fighting the resistance. I didn't want to look back, but I couldn't help it. I glanced over my shoulder. A hand was now visible through the door gap. Just the fingers, long, slow, deliberate, curling around the edge of the door like whoever was out there was preparing to push it open. I didn't think anymore. I didn't plan. I just climbed. I shoved myself through the window frame so fast my knees slammed against the sill. Pain shot up my leg, but adrenaline pushed me forward. I didn't care. I dropped into the yard, landing hard on both feet. My ankle twisted, but held. I looked back up at my window. The door inside my room was now fully opening. I could see it through the blinds, the shadow of it swinging wide, and the shape of someone stepping in. I didn't see his face. I didn't want to. I ran. I cut across the grass barefoot, sprinting toward my neighbor's house. Every step hurt. I stumbled twice, caught myself, and kept going. I didn't look back again. I didn't need to. I could feel the danger behind me, feel the presence in that house like it was still reaching for me. When I slammed my hand against my neighbor's door, I wasn't even breathing right. I just kept hitting it until the porch light flipped on and Mr. Carver pulled the door open, confused and half asleep. All I managed to say was, "Someone's in my house." And the way my voice sounded, the way it cracked, told him everything he needed to know. The police arrived faster than I expected. 2 cruisers pulled up in front of the house, their lights flashing silently since it wasn't an active chase. I stood in my neighbor's living room wrapped in a blanket Mrs. Carver handed me, but I barely felt it. My entire body was drained, like every bit of adrenaline had burned through me at once. An officer asked me to walk him through what happened. I told him everything, the door being open, the breathing, the footsteps, the shadow, the hand. He didn't interrupt. He didn't question it. He just nodded and wrote things down while the other officers made their way toward my parents' house. They went in with flashlights, moving slowly through each room. The Carvers and I watched from their front window. At first, nothing happened. The officers looked calm, sweeping through the rooms like they'd done it 1,000 times. I almost felt embarrassed. What if the guy was gone? What if I had imagined something? Then one of the officers called out from the side of the house, and the others rushed toward him. A sick feeling crawled up my throat. They found a window, one of the basement windows, propped open from the inside. Not broken. Not forced. Opened. The officer came back to me and asked, "Do your parents ever go into the basement?" "Not really," I said. "It's mostly storage. We barely use it." He exchanged a look with another officer that made my stomach twist. They brought out a small crowbar, a screwdriver, and a dirty backpack they found wedged behind some old boxes. I recognized the boxes. They were full of my mom's holiday decorations. What I didn't recognize was the backpack. "Is this yours?" the officer asked. I shook my head immediately. Inside the bag, they found a toothbrush, a half-eaten protein bar, an old phone charger, and a folded gray hoodie. Normal things. Basic things. But it was the last object they pulled out that made everything inside me go cold. A cheap flip phone. The kind people buy with cash. The kind that doesn't require ID. The officer handing it to me said, "It has pictures." He opened the gallery and turned the screen in my direction. There were photos of the inside of my house. Not taken last night. Taken weeks earlier. The hallway. The bathroom. My parents' bedroom. The kitchen table. And then, a picture of me, asleep, in my bed, taken from inside the doorway of my room. I felt like the floor dropped out from under me. The officer's voice sounded distant when he spoke. "Whoever was in your house tonight wasn't breaking in for the first time. He's been living here, on and off, probably in the basement, maybe longer than you think." My mind kept replaying the picture of me sleeping, trying to understand how many nights someone had stood there watching me. How many times had he come into my room? How many times had he been inches from me? And how many times had I slept through it? The police stayed at the house until almost sunrise. They searched every room again, every closet, every part of the basement. They told me the man must have slipped out through the backyard when I escaped. There were footprints in the grass leading toward the tree line behind the neighborhood, but they ended near the creek. After that, they had nothing. No name. No face. No trace of who he was or where he went. I stayed with the Carvers until my parents drove back from Indiana. The drive usually takes them 5 hours. They made it in 3. My mom didn't even go inside the house at first. She just held onto me on the front lawn like I was a little kid again. My dad talked quietly with the officers, nodding with a kind of numb disbelief I had never seen in him before. When the police finally left, my parents walked through the house with me. I didn't want to, but they insisted we look together so I wouldn't be afraid of the place forever. Every room felt smaller than I remembered. Every hallway felt too narrow. Every shadow felt like it could be hiding someone. In the basement, nothing looked disturbed except for the spot behind the holiday boxes. The dust around them was smudged where the backpack had been pulled out. But there was one detail that the officer hadn't noticed earlier, at least not out loud. On the concrete floor, close to the wall, was a small pile of food wrappers, granola bars, crackers, empty water bottles, some old, some newer, as if someone had been staying there long enough to leave small patterns behind. My mom asked if they belonged to me. I shook my head. My dad didn't say anything. When we went back upstairs, I noticed something else. It was small, but it made me stop cold. On the living room shelf, where my mom kept old family photos, one picture was slightly out of place. Just slightly tilted, like someone had moved it and tried to put it back exactly the way it was.
It was a picture of me.
Taken when I was 12. My mom had dusted those shelves the week before. She does it every Sunday. She would have noticed if the frame had been crooked, which means someone touched it recently. Maybe last night, maybe earlier, maybe while I was gone. I didn't tell her. I didn't want to see the look on her face. For the next few weeks, I stayed with my parents. I barely slept. Every noise felt like a warning. Every creak or tap made my heart jump. The police never called with updates. Nobody was questioned. Nobody matched the footprints. It was like the man had appeared out of nowhere and disappeared the same way. Eventually, I went back to college. I tried to forget everything. I tried to convince myself it was over. But some nights, around the same time, 3 a.m., sometimes a little after, I wake up suddenly for no reason.
No nightmare.
No sound. Just awake. And every time it happens, the first thing I do is look at my door. Most nights, it's closed. But twice now it wasn't. And the second time, I could have sworn I heard breathing.